Imagine if a single day's bloodshed could determine whether your entire civilization would exist or vanish forever. The 16th of July 12 marked that date. On this scorching summer morning in southern Spain, over 200,000 armored warriors assembled on a valley floor that would soon run red with their blood. This wasn't just another medieval battle. This was the moment three rival Christian kingdoms, who had spent centuries slaughtering each other, finally united against an Islamic empire that had already devoured half of Europe. And here's what will shock you: the entire outcome hinged on breaking literal iron chains that bound an elite guard together in a formation no army had ever penetrated. But to understand why this battle mattered, we must first witness the catastrophe that haunted every Christian soul in Iberia. 17 years earlier, in 1195, the sands of Alarcos turned crimson with Christian blood. King Alfonso VIII of Castile, proud, confident, certain God, marched with his banners, led his army straight into annihilation. The Almohad forces from North Africa didn't just defeat him, they obliterated his army like a hammer shattering glass. Wave after wave of Muslim cavalry, their curved scimitars gleaming under the merciless sun, cut through Castilian knights as though their armor was parchment. The slaughter at Alarcos was beyond comprehension. Thousands of Christian prisoners were chained together and marched south to Córdoba, where they would spend their remaining days as slaves building mosques on the ruins of churches. The survivors spoke in trembling whispers of black banners stretching to the horizon, of cavalry so numerous the earth itself seemed to move, and of a leader whose name became synonymous with divine wrath, Caliph Yaqub al-Mansur, the victorious. Alfonso barely escaped with his life. But the man who rode away from Alarcos was not the same king who had ridden to battle. That defeat carved itself into Alfonso's soul like a blade that never stopped cutting. He had believed with absolute certainty that God fought beside him, that righteousness would triumph over the infidel. Yet God had turned his face away. Or so it seemed. In the years following Alarcos, village after village fell to Almohad raiders. Church bells, those sacred voices that called Christians to prayer, were melted down for Moorish cannons. Crosses were torn from tower tops and trampled into mud. Alfonso's court became a place of shadows, filled with whispered doubts and barely concealed contempt. Some nobles questioned whether their king had lost God's favor entirely. But here's what those doubters failed to understand: humiliation can forge steel stronger than any smithy's fire. Alfonso's faith didn't shatter at Alarcos. It crystallized into something harder, sharper, unbreakable. He spent 17 years bearing the weight of that defeat, letting it transform his weakness into an iron purpose. Every morning he knelt before the altar in Toledo's great cathedral, praying not for vengeance but for redemption, not for glory but for one final chance to prove that God had not abandoned Christian Spain. Then, in 1211, the storm clouds gathered once more. Caliph Muhammad al-Nasir, successor to the dynasty that had crushed Alfonso at Alarcos, crossed the sea from Morocco with an army so vast it seemed to darken the very horizon. Al-Nasir sent messengers to every Christian court in Iberia, and their message was brutally simple: I will erase the cross from these lands. Your churches will become stables for my horses. Your sons will be my slaves, your daughters my concubines. Submit now, or watch your entire world burn. Can you imagine receiving such a message? Knowing that behind those words stood an army that had already proven it could deliver on every threat? Alfonso understood immediately this was his moment, his test, perhaps his last. In the flickering candlelight of Toledo's cathedral, Alfonso gathered his most trusted counselors and made a decision that would echo through centuries. He would not face this threat alone as he had at Alarcos. Pride had destroyed him once. Unity would be his salvation now. He sent riders north and east, carrying messages sealed with his royal mark, and these were not commands, but pleas. Brothers in Christ, he wrote, we have fought each other for generations. We have shed Christian blood over borders and titles, while the true enemy masses at our gates. But if we fall divided, we fall forever. Stand with me now, and perhaps God will grant us the victory we could never achieve alone. The response came swiftly. From Aragon, King Pedro II, young, fierce, trained in mountain warfare among Catalonia's peaks, pledged his banner. He and Alfonso had been rivals, even enemies in past years. But Pedro possessed the clarity of youth to see what his elders often missed, that some threats transcend old grudges. "My sword is yours," he declared, "until the crescent falls, or we fall together." From the mountain kingdom of Navarre came an even more stunning commitment. King Sancho VII, called El Fuerte. The Strong was a giant among men, literally towering over his contemporaries at nearly 7 feet tall. Silent, brooding, a warrior king who spoke more with his sword than his tongue. When word reached Rome that 3 Christian kings' rivals who had spent decades bleeding each other were uniting against the Almohad threat, Pope Innocent III recognized the historic significance immediately. He declared this a formal crusade, promising spiritual salvation to all who fought. This wasn't merely politics or strategy. This was divine endorsement, transforming a regional conflict into a holy war that would draw warriors from across Christian Europe. And they came from France. Knights arrived wearing white cloaks marked with crimson crosses, seeking redemption for sins through righteous combat. From Italy came soldiers bearing relics of saints, convinced these holy artifacts would shield them from Muslim blades. Portuguese warriors, hardened by endless border wars against Moorish raiders, marched to join the growing host. Even monks abandoned their scriptoriums, trading prayer books for swords. By spring 1212, a crusader army had assembled unlike anything Iberia had witnessed. Chronicles speak of 70,000 warriors, though the true number remains lost to history's fog. What matters is the sight itself, a sea of banners and armor stretching across the plains of La Mancha, reflecting sunlight like a river of steel. They marched south through fields where heat rose in shimmering waves, following ancient Roman roads through valleys where only vultures had witnessed such gatherings before. At night, their campfires, numbered like fallen stars, scattered across the earth. Soldiers from a dozen kingdoms shared wine and stories, bound together by faith and the terrifying knowledge of what awaited them. The rhythm of war drums echoed through valleys, announcing to every village that the fate of Spain itself was marching toward its appointed hour. But ahead of them, beyond the rolling hills and burning plains, stood the Sierra Morena, a jagged wall of mountains cutting Spain in two like God's own barrier. And behind those mountains waited Caliph Muhammad al-Nasir with an army chroniclers claim numbered over 100,000 warriors. The Almohad forces had sealed every mountain pass. Every valley was watched by scouts, every road guarded by cavalry units ready to slaughter any Christian force foolish enough to attempt passage. The Crusader army arrived at the base of the Sierra Morena to find their path forward blocked completely. The heat was merciless, beating down like hammer blows on steel. Food supplies dwindled rapidly, feeding 70,000 men in hostile territory stretched logistics to breaking point. Water sources were controlled by the enemy or fouled by corpses of animals driven into streams. The very air shimmered with dust and rising despair. Among the ranks, whispers of doubt began spreading like plague. Some soldiers muttered that this was Alarcos again, that Alfonso had led them into another trap. Others claimed God was testing their faith by presenting an impossible obstacle. Even the banners seemed to hang heavier, their colors fading under the relentless sun, as though the crusade itself was dying before battle was even joined. At night, campfires burned dim. Men prayed, argued in heated whispers, and stared at those impassable mountains with growing dread. Officers struggled to maintain discipline as desertions increased. French knights who had marched south with visions of glory began slipping away north under cover of darkness, unwilling to die trapped against a mountain wall. In the royal tent, King Alfonso VIII knelt alone on bare earth, still wearing his travel-stained armor. Sweat and dirt streaked his weathered face. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the crushing weight of responsibility. 70,000 souls depended on his leadership, and he had led them to what appeared to be certain destruction. "Lord," he whispered into the suffocating darkness, "if this is your test of faith, then show us the way forward, or let me fall here among my men. But do not let them die believing. You abandoned them as I once feared. You abandoned me at Alarcos." Outside, the night wind carried strange sounds across the camp. Some swore they heard distant bells tolling, though no church stood within miles. Others claimed to see lights moving in the mountains, where no roads existed. And then, as midnight approached, a figure emerged from the darkness beyond the sentry's watch. A shepherd, barefoot, cloaked in dust and rags, moving through the camp like a ghost materializing from legend itself. The sentries challenged him, spears leveled, but the man showed no fear. He claimed he had wandered these mountains since childhood, knew every hidden path and secret valley, and then he spoke words that would change history. In a dream, a light showed me a way through the cliffs, a passage unseen by the Almohad scouts. I was told to guide you. The Christian commanders were deeply skeptical. Was this a trap? An Almohad spy sent to lead them into ambush? But Alfonso looked into the shepherd's eyes and saw something he couldn't explain. No fear. No deception. Only certainty. We march at dawn, the king commanded. This man will guide us. And if any doubt, remember, God has sent us here for a purpose. Perhaps this is it. So, in the dead of night, the Crusader army began to move. Silent as spirits, they followed the shepherd into the mountains. Torches flickered along cliff faces like fireflies in darkness. The path was treacherous, barely wide enough for horses to pass single file, with sheer drops into black chasms on either side. Men stumbled, some fell screaming into the abyss below, but the army pressed forward. No one turned back, because they understood this was either divine providence or doom, and either way, their fate was sealed the moment they entered that hidden pass. As dawn broke on the 16th of July 1212, the Crusader army emerged on the far side of the Sierra Morena. Before them stretched the plain of Las Navas de Tolosa, and in the distance, like a mirage made terrifyingly real, the vast encampment of the Almohad Empire. Tens of thousands of green and gold banners rippled in the morning breeze. The sight silenced every Christian warrior. Some crossed themselves, others gripped their weapons until knuckles turned white. For a long moment, no sound disturbed the morning except the whisper of wind through grass that would soon be soaked crimson. Then, from somewhere in the Christian ranks, a single voice began, Deus vult. God wills it. The ancient Crusader cry that had echoed from Jerusalem to Constantinople. Others took up the chant, and within heartbeats, 70,000 voices roared as one, Deus vult, Deus vult. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder announcing Judgment Day. On the opposite side, Almohad war drums began their response, a deep, primal rhythm that made the earth itself tremble. The stage was set for a collision that would determine Spain's destiny for the next 3 centuries. King Alfonso VIII rode to the front of his army. His armor bore the scars of Alarcos and 100 other battles. Behind him stood Pedro II of Aragon, young eyes burning with righteous fury. Beside them loomed the massive figure of Sancho VII of Navarre, whose shadow seemed to stretch across the plain like a dark prophecy. Alfonso raised his notched sword toward the heavens, and sunlight caught the blade, transforming it into a beam of fire. Today, his voice carried across the assembled thousands. We fight not for kings or crowns or borders or gold. We fight for the very soul of Spain, for our children, who should grow up Christian, for churches that should ring with bells, not the calls of muezzins. Stand with me now, and let God judge which faith he favors. Priests moved through the ranks, blessing soldiers who knelt in the dust to receive final absolution. Thousands of warriors crossed themselves and whispered prayers they'd learned as children, prayers that now might be their last words. The air grew heavy with anticipation, thick enough to taste the metallic tang of fear mixing with the dust and sweat of men about to test their mortality. Across the valley, in a pavilion of golden silk, Caliph Muhammad al-Nasir observed the Christian host with calculating eyes. He was younger than Alfonso, draped in white robes that seemed to glow in the morning sun. Around him stood his most elite warriors, the Black Guard, a legendary unit whose reputation alone had broken enemy morale in countless battles. These were African warriors, each man linked to his brothers by chains of iron at the waist. They could not flee even if they wished. They would stand or die as one unbreakable unit. When the first rays of direct sunlight pierced through the morning haze, al-Nasir raised one silk-gloved hand. The desert drums intensified deep, rapid, hypnotic. Then came the sound every Christian warrior had been dreading. the massive release of bowstrings. Thousands of arrows darkened the sky like a locust swarm, blotting out the sun. The arrows fell in a lethal rain, striking helmets with metallic pings, punching through shields, finding the gaps in armor that made men crumple and scream. Horses reared, throwing riders.